Well, I'm here basically tonight to introduce Lynn Matkey, who is my very good friend. We worked on this a few times together to kind of get it in its PowerPoint form. And I've known most of these people since I was a little girl. I think you're going to enjoy the program. I don't know why I'm suddenly here all choked up about it, but I kind of am. It doesn't really make sense. But you'll see a lot of interesting images and some of the fabulous stories, especially of Hedwig, who was a force to be reckoned with, without question. And Lynn?
I can't tell you how excited I am to be here tonight and to see all of you walking in the door, because you know I'm connected to so many of you, and to see some of my relatives who made the effort to be here today, who I have not seen in years. So I just want to thank everyone that's here tonight. It's really gratifying. I also want to give my thanks, right when we start off, I want to thank certain people. I want to thank Phil Graupner, who translated a lot of my German letters that I had in the attic. It was like 75 years of correspondence, and I could, of course, not translate them, and he did a wonderful job. So, Phil, I know you're in the audience, and I want to thank you. I, of course, want to thank my dear friend Leanne for helping me collate the pictures and give some sense and order to the PowerPoint, and to my son-in-law, who did the original putting all of the photos on the PowerPoint, and to the rest of my family who schlepped the things down here so I could display them, and who have done a really fine job of helping me get it all together and collect it from the Tuft House. Because many of these things, as you know, who's ever visited the Tuft House, Grandma and Grandpa, Otto and Hedwig's bedroom furniture is on the upper floor of the Tuft House. So many of these things came from there, and there's also other memorabilia. So I invite any one of you who would like to visit the Tuft House to visit it. It's kind of interesting, and it was a wonderful use of all of those things from Grandma and Grandpa's farmhouse. I also want to thank my mother, Adeline Edmonds, because without her book, The Loving Spice of Life, I could never have put this together, because that's where the stories of the Peil family are. And it's a legacy. It's a legacy to our children and to our children's children. So, like I said, Grandma and Grandpa had, 21 grandchildren, and when Grandma died, there were 46 great-grandchildren. So I can't imagine how many progeny after that has come. So it'd be interesting to find out at some future point. And I also want to thank my grandparents for having 10 children, so I could be here to present today, or I would not be here. So, and I also want to say, too, to all of you assembled here today, how important it is to take those things in your attic and the memorabilia that you have collected and to put it in a safe place and make sure it's covered with archival paper and those kinds of things. There's many things that I've thrown away because, of course, it is disintegrated after 145 years. So do yourself and your families a favor by taking care of these things. And I also invite you, if you have family stories that you wish to share, the Bailey's Harbor Historical Society is very happy to take your stories, and you can do your program too. So anyway, thank you. I also want to say that if you're a Columns or an Anschutz or a Kepsel or a Tischler sitting here today, you have Peil blood in you. So that's how far the tentacles reach from the Peil family. Okay, so picture one is the title. And the picture of the story, this of course is the homestead, the Peil family in the late 1800s. But I first want to give you some history, because the story starts in Germany 145 years ago with my great-grandparents, Karl and Augusta Peil. And they were roughly part of the 15 million immigrants in the late 1880s that came to this country. By 1880, Wisconsin had more German Americans than any other state in the Union, and most were Protestant. Lutheran was the majority of the Protestants that came to Wisconsin. The Franco-Prussian War had just ended, and many people were fearing another conscription, and so they were helped along by, there was a general European decline in the economy. So that was the impetus for all of those immigrants, for many of them coming over here. I also want to say that my great-grandfather, Karl, left with his wife, Augusta, and the first 5 of their surviving children. There was Otto, Augusta, Reinhard, Ida, and Emma. Richard and Anna, the last 2 children, were born in Bailey's Harbor. And apparently, and I did not know this until I looked up the obituary in the Door County Advocate, there were 3 sons and 2 daughters that had either been stillborn or died in infancy in Germany. So they had a large family, and like I said, they left from the port of Hamburg, and he received the money for his passage from a man by the name of Albert Gertman. And all I can figure out is that that must have been like an uncle of his wife, because Augusta was a Gerdman. And they emigrated from the port of Hamburg on the Hamburg-America line, and that was one of the major immigrant shipping lines that brought these immigrants over. And this is one of the postcards that was in Grandma's scrapbook, so I'm sure that was the port of Hamburg, and you can read the German up in the corner there. Karl was married to Augusta in 1864, and Karl had been born in Mossau, Germany, and she was born in Schönewald, and she was one of 4 daughters of the Gerdman family. And if you walked in the door tonight, you can see the lid. That is the lid off of the trunk that came over in 1871. And on there is Karl Peil's name with Schönewald 1, which I think means beautiful forest. So I can't believe that it has been in our family that many years, 145 years, and it hasn't disintegrated. But, you know, and it's been sitting in the shed, which I've now taken it out of the shed. It will no longer be in the shed. I'm just so glad it's in this present shape that it's in. So, like I said, but one of the things I thought about, you know, when I was bringing that out, I'm thinking, just think if everybody had these wooden trunks when they came over, those poor stevedores that had to lift these things that were full of a lot of the things that they needed in the new country. Okay, there is Karl and Augusta Peil. And it's not just Lynn's great-grandparents. Lauren Peil is the grandson. Susie is here tonight. Who else is directly here? Yes, Faye and Margaret and Darlene. And those are Karl Peil and, over there, I can't even, Jerry Peil. So Kevin is a great-grandson. And I want to get to Kevin, because if anybody in our family looks like Grandpa Otto, it's Kevin Peil. If you look at that picture up there, Kevin looks just like his great-grandfather. So, and this is an early picture. Okay, Karl was a very serious gent, but he was very well respected in the community. His obituary said, through his firmness of purpose, his keenness in intellect, soundness in Christian knowledge, and wisdom in counsel, he was a splendid example of soberness and moderation. My mother talks about him being a very stern gentleman. And you can see by this picture, I think he was. In the 1880s, before the establishment of the Lutheran Church, my great-grandfather, Karl, together with his friend Henry Perlowitz, who operated a mill in the harbor, arranged reading services they held in each other's homes every Sunday afternoon for neighbors. On May 1st, 1895, he called together 15 families to form a church. He served the congregation on the board of elders and various committees, as well as being an official delegate to synodical conventions. This slide features the incorporation pictures of or photos of Emmanuel Church, and those are the original incorporation of the church. So church was very, very important to he and his wife Augusta. Okay, we can go on. Okay, so any of you who are familiar with County E, E, and F on the corner, those are the trees. He wanted to recreate, he was really into trying to recreate the village in Germany that he came from. And to many of you who have been to Germany, when you go into the small villages, they're always preceded by like rows of linden trees. So instead of milking cows and stuff, he had the children do that so he could plant these trees, beautiful maple trees, and even today some of them still exist. Many of the trees, of course, I mean, they're over 100 years old, so a lot of them have died. But that is the way it looked back in the very, very early days of the century. And then it was such a wonderful pictures that Harley Davidson put this on the cover of one of their magazines. And it was, Leanne and I one day went out there to look at the trees, and John Anderson, thanks to him, he said, well, would you like to have a picture of the Harley Davidson cover? And I said, of course I would. So even they thought the trees were pretty nice because they used it for the cover of their magazine. Kind of a nice Harley for all you motorcycle owners, huh? But anyway, Emma Tuft, many of you, of course, know the story of Emma. She wrote about Carl's trees, and she knew him very well. And she wrote an editorial in the paper, and she said, it was right after Carl had died, "It is not doubt one of the loveliest monuments he or any man could have. There are no names, gold stars, bronze plaques, or arch gateways to sadden those of us who have lost loved ones on humanity's altar. It is all a quiet loveliness, giving us renewed hope, peace, and beauty every day of the year." Okay, photo number 8. Bailey's Harbor in the early 1900s. Now, I have this little pointer, Leanne, do I? I do have. Okay, now, do you know what this is? This is the old town hall in Bailey's Harbor, which is right across from Zock's barber shop, and it's now the post office. Here you have, right over here, that is the old Pruder sawmill. Right there, right over there. And all right down here, this building still stands. This is the old Globe Hotel that Murray and Eunice Schlintz, and I don't know who's in there. I think some of their family probably live in that house. Now, I'm not sure. But I'm thinking this is, Leanne, did we decide that this here was the Lena Betcher? We think this is Lena Betcher's house, for those of you who knew Lena Betcher and Bernard. And I think, Leanne, isn't this where your house is? I think, because then you see this would, what would that be, Larson's house maybe, Jumbo? Okay, Larson's house maybe that is. That does make more sense. And Reuben, okay. Right, Reuben, okay. And what would this be down here? I don't know what that is. But you can see, here's the lime kiln. This is where Orphan Annie's is. The lime kiln is right on the other side of the Orphan Annie's. And this is where, you know, at one point, you know, they milled the lime. So it's right in the corner there. I don't think, are there any remnants there left anymore, Lauren or Annie, from the lime kiln? Is there a little bit left? Okay. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Okay, this is Kevin Peil. Right here. This was, Kevin, I should have you stand up here at some point so everybody could see the resemblance to you. Okay, this was a photo that was sent to Hedwig in Germany, and I think you have to go on to the next one, Leanne. So, okay, this was a letter written by Franz Jischke of Sister Bay to Oma, which was grandmother's grandmother. And they were friends, and this is the letter. There's a dire shortage of the fairer sex and an overabundance of eligible bachelors. Any possibility Hedwig or some of her friends would be interested in coming to America. It is the land of opportunity. Prospective males are willing to advance the required fare of $60, providing they are willing to travel via freighter, which lands in New York. And an extra $40 would suffice them to reach their destination, Door County, Wisconsin. Oh, this, okay. So we got, okay. And this was the photo that Hedwig sent to Otto. She was a model at age 24, and she was had a wonderful figure, and I'm sure that was one of the reasons why she was a model in one of the dress shops in Germany. And she was living at the time when these pictures were taken with her grandmother, who we called, or she called Omla. And so this is how she, was able to meet Otto, was through that correspondence. Okay, you can go on. Okay, this is Hedwig's school photo when she was 8 years old, and that's Hedwig right there. And it said in the book, she was an energetic, apt scholar, always at the head of her class. Her Lehrer, which means teacher in German, bemoaned the fact that she wasn't born a boy because she could make something of her life then. So in those days, you can tell, very patriarchal society, of course. Okay. Okay. When she was in Germany, when she lived with Omla, she worked in their bakery. They had a bakery in Gross Viernau. And she also waitressed at the officers' casino. And this is a picture of her at the casino. When she worked there, she saw the Kaiser with his honor guard, and she always talked about that. And Kaiser was a very small man. And of course, the honor guard was all 6 feet tall or taller. So he looked like this little mouse among his. She wasn't too impressed with him, but she was much more impressed with von Moltke, who was a general or a field marshal or whatever they called him in those days. Okay. Okay, here's the Scotia. This is the ship that brought her over. It was a 3-masted schooner. In 1895, the crossing took 3 weeks. My great delight was in finding her name on the ship's manifest, with her name and also the name of her sponsor, which was Franz Jischke. She was a third-class passenger, and the cost was, of course, $60. One of the stories in my mother's book tells of the trials of the trip. Many, many people were sick, and she was so worried that her intended husband would not find her very desirable, because after 3 weeks of being on the ship and using salt water, her face was very swarthy and wrinkled. So the ship's captain came, and for other women that were on that ship, brought them goose grease so they could, put on their faces and soften it up. And it's really something, because I went to Ellis Island about, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years ago. And of course, I went through the records and I found Grandma's name. And I thought, wow, Grandma, here's her name. And I actually wept to think that she had walked down those stairs. Well, then I came home and I looked at the date. The date wasn't the right date. Well, when I went on Ancestry then, that's when I found the right ship, the right date, and she never even came into Ellis Island. She came into Montreal. So a lot of those early immigrants, Ellis Island wasn't built until 1893, so before that they couldn't. But yeah, it was Montreal, and then she took the St. Lawrence, Seaway wasn't built, but the St. Lawrence River down, and I do not know how she got to Milwaukee. But the only thing I did find out is that Grandpa met her in Fish Creek with his horse and buggy. So I'm wondering if she didn't take like one of those steamers from Milwaukee into Ephraim, or I have no idea. There's no record of that. So it's very difficult to find out some of the finer points. But at least I know the ship. I saw her name on the manifest and her border crossing when she crossed into America. Okay, Leanne, you can. Okay, there's their wedding photo. This was taken not at their wedding. It was taken on their first wedding anniversary as a photographer had come into town. After a short interval, when it was certain she was not pregnant, because they had to know that, because there were a lot of mail order brides coming over, and there were some that, were probably pregnant. So they were married on August 9th, 1895. They were the second couple to be married at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. My great-grandfather Carl told Otto that he must, on entering the church, put his right foot ahead of hers so as not for her to have the upper hand and rule him for the rest of his life. Needless to say, Grandma got there first. And how prophetic that was. They both looked forward to a child, but the firstborn son died shortly after birth, and another was stillborn. When the doctor told her she would never carry a child to term, she was devastated. When she saw an ad for Peruna, a patent medicine that would rejuvenate the system, and I have Leanne to thank for this because she found it on the internet. At $1 a bottle, it was very expensive, but they agreed it would be worth it. 2 years later, after having consumed 35 bottles, she was pregnant. A son called Carl August, who is Darlene and Margaret's dad, was born 9 months later, soon followed by Frida Augusta. It was at this time that Otto's parents decided that Otto and Hedwig needed more room, so they had a house built by Henry Seiler across the street. And that is the house that Richard and Anna Peil moved into, and is now the home of Bobby Schultz. Okay, this is Omla, Paul Heinrich, Frida, and Carl. Of course, Carl is a little boy on the right, and Frida is in Omla's lap. And Paul was Grandma's brother. And why you have Omla and Paul in this picture is because Grandma Hedwig wanted her grandmother to come to this country. Her grandfather had died. So in 1898, after wallpapering many people's houses and she had enough fare, she sent the money over for Omla to come to America. So Omla came to America, and then when she had a little bit more money, she sent for her brothers, Paul and Gustav. And I looked in the 1910 census, 1900 census, or 1910, and on the census, both Paul and Gustav were living with Grandpa and Grandma. So that's what they did those days. Once you got enough money, you sent the money back to the old country so you could bring more of your family over. And they lived there for a good, I think it was like 4 or 5 years until Grandma's mother, Caroline, could come over. And then she sent for Caroline, and I found her in a Ship's Manifest also. She came in 1903. Omla came in 1898, and then her own mother, Hedwig's mother, came in 1903. Okay, Leanne, you can go on with that next one. Okay, that's the family portrait. The only one that's not on that picture is the youngest child, Hilda, who we call Pootie. And the gal here with her had just cut her hair. This is my mother, Adeline Edmonds, and she had been crying because Grandma had spanked her because she cut her own hair before the picture. So she wasn't real happy on this picture. But this is the family. This is Walter Peil. This is Carl. This is Jerry and Darlene's and Margaret's dad. This is Frida. Frida and her husband, Lloyd McKnight, did not have any children. This is, let's see now, Art, right. Rolly is on Hedwig's lap. He was Susie Baldry's dad. And this one is Hans and Otto's lap. Which one is that? Is that Rolly? No, this is Rolly. Hans. I don't recognize it. Hans on Otto's lap. Oh, here's Hans. Hans and his wife, Pat, they had no children also. And Rolly is right here. And that is Lauren's dad, Susie's dad, and Diane, who is now deceased father, and also Kevin Peil's grandfather, and Christy Peil's grandfather. And Martha's right here, yes, right here, Martha. Sorry, Faye. That is Faye Blue's mother right here. She was a year older than my mother. And Walter Peil, he had 2 children, Mary Ann and Kenny, and they're both deceased. Okay, wouldn't you love this cart? I don't know whatever happened to that. Grandpa Otto made that for his firstborn children. And that again, you wonder, these photographs, it's amazing the number of pictures that they actually took in those days, and I'm sure they had to wait for a photographer to come to town, although there was one later, Leanne, wasn't there, that was in town. Okay, you can go on. Okay, and this is how they could get the pictures taken, is because they were advertising Atlas Flower. So when the salesman came, he asked for children that would pose for him. So that's how they were able to get free pictures. So Carl Peil, of course, was the oldest child. And Grandpa, when he was born, they were so thrilled to have this little son. And his hair, as you can see, are real woolly. First of all, he's born with no hair at all. So Grandpa Otto said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll get him a wig if we have to. Well, his hair really grew in on this picture, didn't it? Okay, go ahead. Okay, that's the homestead. That's the homestead that has appeared. And I would say that picture was probably taken in the 1930s, maybe. I would say probably like 1936. And that were all the outside buildings, the smokehouses and the outhouses you can see right there. And when they moved into that house, Carl and Augusta, which were Otto and Hedwig's parents, it wasn't quite as large. They had put an addition on because of all the children that they had. So they had to put a little addition on the house. But it's no longer standing, as you know. It was torn down, what would you say, like 5 years ago? Maybe a little bit longer. Okay, go ahead. Okay, that's Otto's siblings and their spouses. And this is where all the Tischlers and the Ohlenbergs and the Capsules and the Columns come in. Over here on the, as you can see, it tells the names, Anna and Richard Peil. That would be, Richard would be my grandfather, Otto's younger brother. They had no children. And then Ida and William Ohlenberg. Bill, how many children did they have? We have Bill Ohlenberg here tonight, and he represents the Ohlenberg family. Ida, I think they had 3, didn't they? Elda, your dad, Emery Ohlenberg was their son, Alma, and Louise. Okay. And then you had Annie Tischler, and that would be Jumbo's relative, right? What would that be to you, Jumbo? Your great aunt, great aunt, I think it would be too. Okay. And Emma Collins, that's the Collins family. Oswald Collins had a big farm outside of Bailey's Harbor. That was all Otto's siblings from that family. August Anschutz from Jacksonport, Gus Collins. I don't know where that was taken or whose farm that was taken in. But they had many of the stories in the book relate to family gatherings. Family was everything in those days. They worked hard together. They played hard together. They bartered for what they needed. Their needs were met from taking care of each other. One of the stories in the books talks about 25th wedding anniversary of my grandfather and grandmother, and the relatives all coming from Milwaukee, and they were musicians. Paul and Gustav Heinrich were very, very good musicians, and they played until the wee hours in the morning, so that hasn't changed. People did have parties, and they had, when they had fun, they had a lot of fun. So, okay, go on to the next one. Okay, this is Grandpa at the State Fair. In the early 40s, he was delighted. Somebody asked him, one of the other farmers up here asked him to go, and the love of my grandfather's life was his farm. He loved farming. He loved his animals. He was a tremendous horseman. Went to a lot of, Leanne, would that be your grandfather when they had the sulky races down here? His brother, okay, and he loved it. He loved what he did, and so when he had the opportunity to go to Milwaukee to the State Fair, he was looking at all, so this made the Milwaukee Journal in the paper on the Sunday rotogravure, I imagine. Okay. Okay, that's their silver wedding anniversary. And we have the silver vase that she got and some of the other gifts that people gave them, and that's when they had their wonderful celebration for the 25th. They talked about, I don't know how many quarts of potato salad and sausage and hams and everything else. But one of the things about being on the farm is that it was kind of, they didn't suffer as like during the Depression because they had plenty of food. Mother talks about 700 quarts of peaches and pears and all of this fruit stored. And then she talks about, like, I didn't realize this, but they would fry up the pork chops and put them in big crocks in the shed with lard over the top. And that preserved that for the winter. And many, many hams. And the smokehouse, one of the stories in the book talks about the smokehouse going up in flames and destroying an entire winter's worth of hams and bacon. So that wasn't a very good happening, but I'm sure in those days fire was always a problem. Am I? Okay. Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Okay, this is a confirmation class, and the pictures you saw over here are of my mother and Martha, the two girls. My mother is on the left, Adeline Edmonds, and Martha is on the right. And the dresses were made by Grandma for the girls, and they also made Esther Stencil's dress because I guess Esther's mother couldn't sew. But I'm sorry that Jane Reamer isn't here tonight, Jane Reimer Pluff. That's her dad in the middle. They all were confirmed together. This was a big deal. I mean, these confirmation, very, very important. And in the book, Grandma tells us, my mother tells a story about the girls were pretty good about going to confirmation classes. Boys didn't like it at all. So they tried to get out of them all the time. And one time, the boys had gone to confirmation class, or so Grandma thought. And what they did is they gone in the woods and checked their traps instead. Well, they'd caught a skunk in the trap, and the skunk sprayed the boys. So they didn't want Hedwig to find out because they knew she'd be furious and they'd probably get a spanking. So they came home and they buried their clothes. And she couldn't figure out what happened to this clothes and stuff. And she thought, well, I didn't send him off to confirmation class with that. Well, it wasn't the next day the minister came up and said, where was Wally and Art and blah, blah, blah. And of course, they got the hiding of their lives when she found out that the skunk had deterred them from their class, but those things happen. Okay. Okay, this is Emmanuel Church. Grandma lived for this church. She loved her church, and she always made sure that the pulpit was decorated with flowers. Grandma's love of her life was the gardens. She lived for her gardens, and she spent a lot of time. There were so many things that she learned to do in her lifetime. She was a midwife when she came over to this country, and I never did find out how she learned how to be a midwife, but she delivered over 100 babies in the Bailey's Harbor area. And one of the stories that she told was that the biggest baby she delivered, and for some of you Bailey's Harborites, it was Arnie Pruder. He weighed over 12 pounds. And she said it was the head, you know, she didn't think he would live. Well, we know Arnie lived to a ripe old age. And we who knew Arnie remember him. Remember what a big man he was with a very big head. So we knew Grandma had a hard time with that. Grandma also did a lot of midwifing for a lot of the farm families out there, and she had many stories to tell about that. And one of the things that she did is that she would bring home all of the sheets and all the things from the delivery, and her children were not real happy with that, because, especially her daughters, because they had to do all the laundry from her midwifing services. So even though she liked to do it, and it was always ways for her, she was always thinking of ways that she could be outside of the home because she loved doing things for others. And like I said, Emmanuel was really high on her list. So go ahead. This is right after her first Christmas in America. Did they keep the old chandeliers in the new when they built the new church? They did. Okay. And some of the stained glass too, I would imagine. But you can see the age of that. The Christmas tree, if you can look close enough, you can see candles on that tree. So that is that would be, well, 1896 is what it would be. Okay. Okay, this is the cottage that almost cost Hedwig her marriage. Grandma decided that she wanted to have, to buy property. And I have to thank Chris Shore. She brought me a plat map today with the 5 Rotman lots. That was called the Rotman Addition underneath the bluff. And Grandma insisted that she wanted to buy lots because she wanted to build summer homes for tourists, because there were tourists starting to come, were coming to Door County. Welker's Resort and Fish Creek was running at that time, and there were other resorts around the area. And I think Scenic Grove was in existence. So you see, she could see a need for this. So she wanted my grandfather Otto to buy these 5 lots. Well, Otto wanted to buy a horse, he wanted to buy another shed for the property and stuff, and he absolutely refused. So Grandma wasn't satisfied. She said, well, I'm going to leave you then. If you're not going to give me the money to buy these lots and build these cottages, I'm leaving. So she left my grandfather Otto, moved to Milwaukee, moved in with her sister Bertha, who had no children, moved in with her and got a job at a Jewish delicatessen. And that wasn't, she knew after a few weeks that, she really missed her children. My mother quit school. She was 13 or 14 years old. She was in the 7th grade because there were still little children at home. This was 1920. And so my mother quit school to help with the other children and stuff. And Grandma worked at this Jewish delicatessen, and she missed her blood and liver sausage that they would make on the farm. So she had her mother send her this liver and blood sausage, which she hid under the bed because it was a kosher Jewish home. And you don't have blood and liver sausage. And so they found it. The people where she was boarding, because she was boarding in a Jewish, so they were not very happy with her living there. If she was going to get the sausage sent to them, to the boarding house that she was at after she left Bertha's house. She lived with Bertha for a while, then she lived in a boarding house. So anyway, then she was gone about I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months, and she decided, no, it wasn't worth it. She was moving back home. So needless to say, she moved back home, and Otto gave in, and she bought the lots, the 5 lots under the bluff for $65 a piece. And then she contacted Henry Seiler and said, I want you to build a cottage for me. So he said I couldn't do it. It was too busy. So he said, well, I can do it in the fall. So in the summer of 1920, they began excavating. Rolly Peil, Lauren Peil, and Susie Peil's dad, he helped with that, excavating the land and stuff. And you can see the old car sitting in the little drive there. And then Henry Seiler came and built a house. And one of the funniest stories is of the house building. Grandma would come down all the time and inspect the house because she wanted to make sure it was being done to her specifications. And there was a knot in the stairwell. And she told Mr. Seiler, she said, you can't do that. You got to get that knot out of here. And he looked at me and he said, if you want to be the carpenter, I'll be the gardener. And that was the end of her complaining, except she didn't like it. He was going to close off in those days in order, because every room was heated by either coal or a wood stove. And he said, you're going to spend a fortune heating this house. So I'm going to put walls up between the dining room and the living room. She says, no, I want pillars between, these 2 rooms. She said, this is a Sears home. This was a Sears home from the 1908 Sears catalog. She sent for the plan. It cost her $1. And in the plan, there were these pillars. And so she insisted that those pillars, and she did win, the pillars are still there, but the knothole is still there too. Still there, I can see the knothole, which is a problem with. But anyway, that is the house, and you can see there is no road in front. There is no school street in front of the house. It's a field. I do not, I know, this one, the man on the right is Uncle Carl Heinrich. That was Grandma's brother. The man on the right. I do not know the other 2. Okay, anytime. There's Grandma and her flowers. And that's like a lot of you remember. she would push out, it was her baby buggy from her children. And I would say Grandma was probably in her maybe late 70s there. She would take the baby buggy every Sunday morning down to Emmanuel Lutheran Church full of flowers. You can go. There. That's one of the pictures, one of my favorite pictures of her, as I remember her every Sunday. Gibby Carlson was here last night. We were talking, I think Gib and his wife are here tonight. We were talking that he remembers her and her flowers. One of the things, though, I did overlook before when I was talking about it, before we got into the 20s with the house and before the flowers, somebody asked me about, like, did any of the children go to war? And in the First World War, Carl was the only one old enough to go. And they were worried about him having to go into the First World War. And it was very difficult for the children, Otto and Hedwig's children, because when the First World War began, there was this resentment because, they started school and the children did not speak English. They spoke German. Carl spoke German. And the town kids did not always get along with the country kids. And so they were called Huns. And so then my grandmother determined that she did not speak English at the time. So she determined that she wanted to learn to speak English so the children would speak English also, because there was a little bit of, resentment as well, you can imagine, when America got in the war. So Carl, she did not think would be called up, because Carl was born with his right hand was a little bit gimpy, and I think you kids can attest to that. I don't think he had the range of motion in his right hand. So my grandmother thought that would keep Carl out of the war. Well, they drafted him. And they got as far as Milwaukee when the armistice was signed. So they came back. He never had to go into the war. And in the Second World War, the only one of the children that actually was in the service was Hans. And he was called up, and he, because of speaking German was his, tongue, his natural born tongue, he became a translator for the American Army, and they stationed him in North Africa. And he did nothing but interpret the Rommel's troops. That's what he was with the Africa Corps was there, and Rommel's troops, and that was what his job was during the service. So the children, it was hard for Grandma. It was very difficult for Grandma during those world wars because she was very Germanic, and her German ancestry meant a lot to her, but yet she looked at America as the land that gave her a home and a family. So there was always that dichotomy of loving Germany, but yet knowing that, this was the land of the free, and she wanted to be a part of that, and she wanted her children to be a part of America. But she always had wonderful memories of Germany and always wanted to go back and never got back. One of my fondest memories, Grandma, the reason I know a lot about Grandma is she lived with us for the first 18 years of my life. And I still remember as a little girl when the Berlin blockade was on, she had friends in Germany, and her best friend, Anna Eschrich, lived in Berlin. And I remember Grandma sitting at the dining room table, and she would be getting coffee, sugar, flour, and stuff. And we would have my brother and myself would be sitting there holding, she'd buy flour sacks, and she'd be sitting there taking twine around all the edges, and we'd say, what are you doing? If they really want to get in, she said, those Ruskies. She hated the Ruskies, the Russians. The Russians were the root of all evils to my grandmother, and she wanted to make sure that those packages, so for all the early, in the 1950s, I think probably up until 1956, we were sending packages to Germany, because that was high on her list of priorities that she wanted to share and have them share in her largesse. So, okay, go ahead. Oh, yes. This is another one of Grandma's things. She lived, very Germanic also, taking care of the cemetery. She spent many, many days out there. She would be weeding all the time. The bane of her life were weeds. And anybody that knew Grandma knew that she was on a weed foraging expedition in people's yards even. They had weeds, she'd go and get them. And the cemetery, she did not want to see a weed on any of her family's graves. So she would bring us children. That is my brother and myself and Lauren and Susie's sister Diane is a little girl on the right. And she'd bring us out there and we'd weed the graves. And you know that saying, first you love your mother, then you hate your mother, and then you are your mother? Well, that's where I am right now. Because I'm now out there weeding the graves. So we just pass it, we play it forward. Okay. Oh, and this is another of Grandma's wonderful, wonderful hobbies that she made money off of. She was a wonderful cake decorator. She learned how in her grandmother and grandfather's bakery in Germany how to decorate cakes. And she decorated many, many, many wedding cakes and birthday cakes and you name it. And they were beautiful cakes. And many of the people in this town who had a wedding, I mean, like for her grandchildren, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if Darlene or Margaret, she decorated your cakes, but many of the grandchildren who got married, she decorated their cakes. And there are some beautiful ones that we have in the scrapbook. I think there's a few more. Is there a few more, Leanne? Oh, this is Ted, and I have this wrong, and I apologize, because I looked in Mrs. Boynton's book, Faith Builds a Chapel. It's Carl and Andre Vale. It's Mrs. Boynton's child from her first marriage. He was killed in a car accident, and then she married Boynton. Carl was in World War II, and Andre was a French girl that he met. And when the war was over, he brought Andre over, and Grandma was Mrs. Boynton's gardener at Boynton's Chapel for many, many years. And so she decorated, you can see it's the bride's cake and the groom's cake, and did the flower arrangement for their wedding. And Boynton's Chapel, is an outgrowth of, World War II. She wanted a place that was built to peace. And her son, Carl, and one of her husband, Don Boynton's son, was also in World War II. So when he came home, Ted and Andre got married. And interesting enough, when I worked at Scandia Village, one of the residents there was a family member of the Vales. So I got to see pictures of Ted and Andre, and they lived into I think they were like 90 years old on this picture living in California. So they lived a good long life. Here's Hedwig and Mrs. Boynton. They were wonderful pals. In fact, in the book when I was reading the other day, Mrs. Boynton talks about Grandma and her going to Sturgeon Bay to pick out flowers for Bjork London. And she said, I thought I was going to pick out the flowers. And she said, I'd leave the flower shop, and I hadn't picked out anything because Grandma had picked out everything. And she said, Hedwig just had this eye for plants. And she said, who was I to tell her that, deny her what she wanted? So they had a friendship for all the years that Mrs. Boynton was at the chapel. Wonderful, wonderful relationship. Oh, and there's the cookie house. Grandma made this cookie house in 1944, and she sent for Hansel and Gretel from Germany. And 2 Christmases ago, my daughters and my grandson rehabbed it. We finally took out all the old cookies, and when Lee and I were children, we kept eating on the cookie house. So half of it was missing. So it's got a wooden, the cookie house itself is wooden inside, and whoever made it, I think it was probably Henry Seiler. He's got it signed H. Seiler in the inside, and the wooden frame is 1936. So Grandma decorated this, and we've had it every year in our family for Christmas. It's part of our tradition, so it's carrying on the tradition with the children now. So she was a great decorator. She loved to decorate everything. And the Pfefferkuchen over there on the table, did you see the Pfefferkuchen? And Leanne reminded me of this also. Grandma loved making this German hard, maybe Ursula, are you familiar with this? We have some very German people sitting in our front row here. Pfefferkuchen was a tradition. Every Christmas, our tables would be full of Pfefferkuchen. And they were made with molasses, I think, and hard. We never ate them. Grandma would decorate these with beautiful, she'd cut out always the Wiseman and hearts, and then she'd put this foil paper in, and then we called it spritzing all the way around. And like Leanne remembers too, the school kids, she would give them like for birthdays to kids. I think Emmanuel Lutheran kids got a lot of them. She gave them to probably the children of the church. But it was really a very desirable thing. And this one was in the attic. It's been there since 1947. And you can see it's very deformed. But she gave it to our Hinkwinett for a Christmas present. So somehow I think maybe Mrs. Hinkwinett gave it back to my grandmother, and then it was in the attic. But I think after this program, I think it's going to go bye-bye. It's really, but that is a German tradition. That's Pfefferkuchen. It was a wonderful art. People just really prize those. You can go. This is Mrs. Burke. Do you recognize this house on Ward Street? She did all the gardens for that. And I look at those flowers even to this day, and some of them are the same flowers that just keep coming up year after year after year in the same spot that they're planted. The peonies, the daffodils, all of it is exactly the same as it was when she planted it. Beautiful garden, rock garden. She hauled all those rocks. I mean, she was a very, very, very active woman. Okay, this is when she turned 80, and they put on a surprise birthday party for her at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. And she didn't know anything about it, and they asked her, they told her that they wanted a birthday cake made for this lady that lived in town, and she said, and they told her how to make it, and she said, I don't want to make a cake like that, it looks like a casket. Well, she was actually making it for herself because they wanted that cake for her birthday, so she made it, and it was a wonderful surprise birthday. In fact, it was held in the basement of this town hall. And in the next picture, they gave her, this is a lot of the people that some of you will recognize. They had 8 cakes with 10 candles, and some of the people on this picture I think you will recognize. Virginia Hansen, Frida Reamer, Joyce Collins. That's a Hunnell in the background there. Girls from the congregation brought the cakes out, and it was one of the highlights of my grandmother's life. And she got letters from all over the country. All the ministers that she always had a fond relationship with every minister that was a minister at Emmanuel, and she'd have them for Sunday dinners all the time. And the kids wouldn't like it because they'd get the chicken and they'd get the fried potatoes because the ministers got the good, the entrees. But she was very, very beloved by so many people in the town for all of her good works over her lifetime. So this was their way of honoring her, and it was a lovely party. I don't know, how old would I have been when she was 80? Maybe like 9? So not very old. But she had some wonderful happenings in her life, and I forgot to mention this, and I wanted to talk about this also. Grandma's big happening in 1932 was she was able to go to the World's Fair in Chicago with Ivor Anderson, who owned the Bailey's Harbor Laundry. And that was a real highlight of her life, because I guess they had some of the most wonderful botanical gardens at that World's Fair. And one of the other highlights at that World's Fair was that she went to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller told her 3 things. She told her that how many children she had. She told her that 2 children were going to predecease her, which they did, and they told her she was going to live a long life, and that also. So she thought that fortune teller at that World's Fair was one of the best things that ever came her way. It was kind of cute. Okay, go ahead. This is her guest cottage. Now, on one of the 5 Rotman lots, she built another little cottage, and I think, Lauren, your dad worked on this, if I'm not mistaken. He helped build this little cottage, and she called this the honeymoon cottage, and she rented this out to all kinds of tourists. Every summer, they would come back, a lot of the same people year after year, and became very good friends with the family. And it was just a little cottage. It had a little outhouse on the outside. There was no indoor plumbing. There was a faucet inside, but there was no indoor plumbing. And she loved it. She planted all the gardens out there, too. She had a wonderful time planting her gardens at the cottage. And then the people, if you know which cottage this is, it's the one on Ward Street or Guy Street. And it's right next to Max Sample and his wife. Right, south of the schoolhouse. Yeah, that's a better explanation. And you can see how different it is now. They put a wonderful addition on that house. And there's Grandma in front of the town hall. She decided she wanted to buy the town hall because she wanted it. So, so what she did is when McCarlo built the town hall here, she bought the old town hall over right across from Willard Zock, which is now the post office, is where it's located. And I remember as a child going down there, the rooms, she had them all divided. She had Rolly, her son, divide up the rooms, and she rented those out for tourist rooms. And this building had no indoor plumbing. There was an outhouse out in back, and she had pumps, like hand pumps in the little kitchen areas. And after that era, like I would say probably in the mid-1950s, is when Mr. Hubbard, who lived out on Kangaroo Lake, and maybe you know this, Patty. Do you remember the Hubbards that lived in Kangaroo Lake?
I think his wife was Rita, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. He had a business in there. He made something. I don't remember if it was little motors or whatever, but he had a regular business in there making some equipment. What it was, I do not know. But then, eventually, then it was sold to the post office, where their building is now. Yes?
My dad tore that front hall down.
Yes, he did. That's right.
Where he lived on F, he built his garage on it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Lauren said his dad tore it down. I think Grandma sold it actually to Rolly, and then he tore it down and built it. What did he do? A garage? Okay, sure. Okay. This was Otto and Hedwig's 50th wedding anniversary. This would have been taken in, let's see now, they were married 50 years. They were married in 1895, so that would have been 1945, yeah. This was taken not too long. Grandpa died in 1946, and I don't remember him. Lauren and Susie do, but I don't remember him. I was only 2 years old, but this was their wedding anniversary. They lived long enough. One of my favorite pictures of my grandmother in her flower garden, one of her favorite sayings was always, I give my whole life to make beautiful, because she loved her garden. That was taken in front of her little cottage. Okay, go ahead. Okay. And this is I took out at the cemetery a few weeks ago. And I look at this and I get kind of emotional when I see that, because I think, you know, if her Lara could have seen her at the end of her life, I think he probably would have thought, you know, it was okay that she wasn't born a boy, that she did make something of her life, and that she, you know, in her own way, like my husband said so aptly, he said, you know, she probably didn't break through the glass ceiling, but she made a crack in it, because she always was looking for things to do, to make a difference. You know, I think she saw the possibilities in this town. I think she, you know, she looked at her life as a gift of being in America. I think that she looked at the people around her in this town, and it was such a camaraderie among people. You know, it was a barter system. I mean, some of the stories that she talked about that we, you know, that I remember is like going to Brand's store, and she would trade her liver and her blood sausage and all the things that they made on the farm, and Brand, in exchange, would give them the staples. And it was that kind of economy in those days, that people, if you didn't have something, you looked to your neighbors, you looked to your other people around you to get what you needed. And it was a simple way of life, but it was a good way of life. And I think that we who live in Bailey's Harbor, you know, we are really the recipients of a very, very rich history, that of all of these pioneers that came to this town, and they had nothing to start with, but, you know, they had their hands and they had that wherewithal. And, you know, and with the Germanic heritage, they're very, very, how shall I say that, stubborn in many ways. They're going to make their way, and I think they did that so well and so aptly. And I think that, you know, I look around me and I look at some of the houses in this town that go back to when I was a child and all the wonderful memories I have. And, you know, we pass it on. We pass it on to our children and to our grandchildren and to the people who have moved here. They brought their own ideas, and we've been the winners, you know, on that also. You know, they're bringing new blood and new ideas. So we can only go forward. And I just want to thank all of you tonight for coming and hearing this pioneer story. And I know you too have your own stories. And one of the nicest things a few weeks ago is I hope that some of you got to watch with Wisconsin Public Television where they did the hometown stories. Wonderful. And then if you bought the DVD, the trailer was about Bailey's Harbor. They had a brief history. They had the McCardle family. They had Grandma's Mail Order Bride on there. And they had the Zahn House. Wonderful stories, you know. So I encourage you, you know, if you're interested in that history, to, you know, purchase one because it's really nice. It's a good family gift to have to yourselves or for your children. So on ending, I also want to thank all the people in the Historical Society who brought the goodies and who gave of their time to make this happen. I encourage you people who live in Bailey's Harbor, and even if you don't live here, to become a member of the Bailey's Harbor Historical Society. Wonderful newsletters. It helps to sustain the programming that they put on, and they've just done a marvelous job with these programs. So, you know, and I want to give a few minutes. If anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free to ask. Yes.
And please wait for the mic to come to you.
Yes.
School teacher's voice, I don't need that, but I'll use it.
I need it.
All right, is it on? Yes. Those of you that saw the house from Sears, in the Toft House, we have a 08 calendar from Sears that a catalog from Sears that you can come down and buy a house for about $1,000, horse and buggy for $45, and it's really, come down and take a look at that catalog. It is unbelievable, man. All kinds of those plans are in there.
Right. Speaking about buying things, I just want to tell one little thing. It was really cute because of this, bringing up the Sears catalog. My grandmother's neighbor brought a package over to my grandmother, and he said, I am so mad. I spent $4.98 to get this woman in the catalog. He thought he was getting a mail order bride like Otto had. Instead, he got the dress out of the catalog. I wanted to tell you that. So mad. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Susie. If anybody else has any. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, Bella.
Can we get all the Peil family and their siblings
We're going to do that.
and spouses for a picture?
Yes, we are going to. I was just going to say that, Lauren. Thank you. I want that. But for all of them answering questions, if anybody else has any. Yes, Bella. This is my granddaughter.
When did Hedwig die? When did Hedwig die?
Hedwig died in 1963, April 2nd, 1963.
Oh, come on, somebody else got to have a question. There's so much good stuff here. She did a good job.
Thank you very much.
Why did they come to Wisconsin? Why did they not stop in Ohio or somewhere else?
Okay, I think that they came to Wisconsin simply because Franz Jischke from Sister Bay sponsored them. And I think there were other people from that particular area of Germany that had come to Door County. So I think, and I think Phil Graupner can probably attest to that, that people came to certain areas from Germany to certain areas in Wisconsin. Is that correct, Phil? What is it called? Chain immigration. Okay. Why don't you explain that, Phil? Susie, I'll give you the microphone because we can't hear you.
Oh, hi. it was very typical in a family that someone usually young, the younger men or the boys would go first, and then they would get established, probably even buy a property or something like that, or at least earn some money, and then they would start having other families, or other members of the family follow them. And like in our family, just from one side of, in our family, 18 people came from basically from one family, and all the relatives.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, that answers that.
I think our great-grandpa, Carl, when he said that to our grandmother or to our grandfather, looking at Lynn and myself, I think Everett would attest to this, that we probably picked up a lot from our grandmother. A lot, right, Everett?
I think so. I think you can probably attest to
No
that.
comment. Any more questions? She was an amazing lady. She used to drive the town chairman crazy because the lot across from her house was an open field and there were weeds growing on there, which then crossed the road into her yard. And so she was constantly on him about that.
Also, I want to say too, over here on the display table, some of the pictures there, as you can see, are from like Gib Carlson. He lives down, and Joe and Roy live on Frogtown in that area. And those pictures are from the Frogtown Art Colony, because those artists would go out to the farm and paint the pictures, and Grandma would feed them chicken dinners and things, and they would give her paintings and pictures. And those are 3 of the pictures that Grandma has from the art colony from the early 1920s. So they're real keepsakes. So, and we think, somebody asked me earlier, where did the hair wreath? That's got all 10 children's hair on it. And I do not know who made it. I think that what she did is she sent that hair back to Germany, and somebody wove it back there and sent it back here, because Grandma would be ordering from Germany all the time. She ordered great-grandma Oma's headstone, that porcelain headstone that is out at the cemetery. She ordered that from Germany, and how that got shipped here in one piece in 1915. Think of it. I mean, those days, and it had to go by ship, and it's in beautiful shape. The gilt on it, the gold gilt, is still in excellent shape. So, and you know, with the inclement weather here and everything, that porcelain headstone has held up so well over the years. It's amazing. So, yeah, and we used to always get lots of good German candy. I remember that as a child. She'd send for good German, because we didn't make candy quite as good as the Germans did. So we got German candy. The farm is on the corner of EE and F, right on the corner when you go towards Fish Creek one way and Egg Harbor the other. It was right on the corner. And the trees are still, you'll see the trees. They're still there. There's a lot of dead, what are those trees that are dead there? There's poplars. Poplars, yeah, there's a lot of dead poplars there on the corner. But further down are still some of the maple trees that my great-grandfather planted.
Why was Peil Creek misspelled?
Well, you asked Phil Grosvenor that. He's the one that got it changed, you know. He did not like it, was misspelled for so long. So he petitioned the town, did you? Or who did you petition, Phil? Okay, wait just 1 second, Phil, because we can't hear.
It actually started out with Rebolt's Creek, which had the signage there had changed to Rybolt. And the creek was named after August Rebolt, and that bothered me. So that's what I started with. But then Peil Creek, even though the signs at the creek were still Peil, but somebody went through the bother of changing the name to Peil. And there aren't any Peils in Door County, or definitely not in Bailey's Harbor Township. So I thought it was just a matter of changing the signs, but because it had been an official name, both of them had become official names, there was, every map would have still been using the wrong spellings. So I had to request a change, and it took me a year, with a lot of help from Greg Colthurst from the Soil and Water Department, part of the DNR, the local DNR.
The creek runs, I think it's Mean Pile Creek, because Carl and Elsie Pile lived on that farm, right?
Yeah.
That creek ran through. Is that correct?
Probably.
Yeah, I know the creek ran
I
through,
don't
right,
know the
Darlene?
history
Yeah,
of.
it ran through
of
there,
Innan.
Jerry, right? That creek? I
So-
remember that, their farm was right down from that, because we used to go and get fish out of that creek
So
when we
now,
were kids.
yeah, so now both names are official. Even Rebolt Creek is now a nationally official name. It had to be approved by this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, right, we are all cool now. Yes, Lauren?
Went down that creek to Kangaroo Lake.
Oh, really?
Oh,
There moonshining going
Right,
on?
Marlene? Remember?
Okay. That probably is, there was some moonshining in those days,
Didn't he
absolutely.
spend time in jail, Uncle
Right.
Carl?
I don't think so.
I think so. Didn't Uncle-
No,
Yeah?
Art Peil was in the Coast Guard, because we have our chiefs meeting and his name gets read at every meeting.
That's right, he was in the Coast Guard. Thank you, Bill. That's right, Art was. That's right. I forgot, I knew Hunts was in. I forgot about Art. That's right. Well, again, I hope that if you have some Peil blood in you, that you will stick around and then we can take a group photo, because it'd be kind of fun to just see how many people, that Peil string.
Stand in front of that screen while it's
Yeah,
down.
that's a good idea. In front of the screen, that's a good idea. So, like I said, again, thank you so much for coming. It's just wonderful to have all of you here tonight.